Sports Interaction, Canada Sportsbook.
It is definitely game over for the Philadelphia Flyers, especially if John Tortorella was awake during that one. You know he's not going to be happy with that effort. Big Montreal Canadiens win. We saw output from the defensemen, so that's something we're going to talk about, the overall just effort level you're seeing from a lot of players now that the lineup's in complete chaos. Sean, Chris Tierney, of course, scored his first goal. I know the tank team out there is very unhappy, but hey, wins happen. There's nothing you can do to stop it. We have a fantastic guest today, Montreal native, and also one of the referees that actually reached the 1,500 mark in the NHL, which is, among elite companies. So we have Dave Jackson, who's joining us very shortly. And if you're paying attention, his son, Ryan, was actually the linesman today. So we can talk about that as well. Before we get going, I just want to give a shout out to everyone in the chat. Let me just pull that up real quick. See you beautiful people. Thank you for joining us. Also, just right now, I'm going to say it before I forget, make sure to like the chat, subscribe, or else my bosses will be upset. And really cool news, tomorrow we have Owen Beck on the show. So back-to-back stellar guests. It'll be a lot of fun. Hey, James is here. Trinka is here. Canty Canadians here as well. Trizak, big fan. Jean-François Paré as well. Hi, Robert. Hi, everybody. Let's get right into it with Dave in just a moment. But for now, a quick word from our sponsors. Want to bet? You can do it at Sports Interaction Canada Sportsbook. Hockey season's well underway. Pitchers and catchers have reported, so I know all the baseball folks are happy about that. And, the baseball season is around the corner. So you can bet pregame, live in play. There's also a ton of prop bets made for Canadians by Canadians. Sports Interaction makes it easy to deposit, play, and cash out. Join now and see all sports betting has to offer. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. That's sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. Ontario only, please play responsibly. And now let's bring in our guest, Dave Jackson. Dave, how's it going, buddy?
It's going great. How are you doing, Mark?
I can't complain. Dave, I actually brought you on for a Flyers game thinking we'd have a lot to talk about, but, there wasn't much going on there. These aren't the Flyers of old, are they?
They're certainly not the Broad Street Bullies, are they?
No, I've never seen a team this soft in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and I'm sure Tortorella will change that as time goes by, because he likes heavy hockey. He likes an effort, likes the physicality. So I wish him the best of luck.
Well, that's one
I
thing.
hope better days are ahead for him.
One thing I wanted to ask you was, how was it dealing with a guy like John Tortorella? I feel like he's calmed down a little bit. But how was he with you? Was he respectful? Did he drop those F-bombs? How did that go?
Yes to both. He's one guy I get asked about the most,
yeah.
And he's one of my favorite coaches, because you always knew where you stood with John Tortorella. He wouldn't work you. He wouldn't be on you every penalty. There's some coaches where, you call 3 penalties on their team and they're all obvious penalties, and they try and get your attention, and they're just giving you one of these. Come on, Dave, you sure about that?
Yeah.
And they're just trying to work you. And John doesn't do that. John only yells when he feels he has a reason to yell, and he'll let you have it. I mean, he'll let you have it, but you can go over there and you let him have it too. You go nose to nose, and there's been times maybe where I felt, geez, maybe I stepped over the line a little bit. I've skated by him on a stoppage and said, "Hey, John, about that conversation." He'll look at me and go, "Dave, I've forgotten about it, so you forget about it too." And you just move on. So I love John. I love John Tortorella.
So there is a certain level of, I might insult you quickly, but there is that level of respect once it's all said and done. Was there ever a coach that didn't quite understand that you had to build that level of respect before unloading on referees?
Yeah, there's been a couple, and they're guys that didn't really pay their dues in the NHL as assistant coaches. I mean, I'm talking over the years, and no one specifically, but I find if you come right from junior or come right from college, you have a tendency to be able to intimidate the referees a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And you expect you can do the same thing when you step into the NHL. I had one coach one time stood in the doorway and demanded I come over and talk to him. And he was literally yelling, "I demand you come and speak to me." And I remember Brian Murphy, the longtime linesman, multiple Stanley Cup finals, slid by him. He goes, You can demand all you want because he's not coming.
This is before a game, during a game,
No,
intermission,
this is
or?
during a game. During
Okay.
a game, he didn't like one of the calls I made, and I always tell referees or younger referees, going to the bench to talk to the coach is a really good tool
Yeah.
in your toolbox, but you want to use it to your advantage.
Hmm.
You want to go over there when it benefits you. You don't want to go over there when he's demanding you come talk to him. That's just a license for it to go wrong. So
Yeah, or saying
yeah,
have another donut. That's another thing that you're not supposed to say to referees out there. If
there
anyone's
you go.
younger here, you can go Google that, and that's the wrong way to speak to referees. You never had any incident like that where did you ever have that where coaches were red with anger?
Well, maybe, but not to the point where it got to the
Personal.
social media the way that one did. I mean, that was yeah, that was memorable. In fact, his brother just retired, Terry Koharski.
Oh, okay.
And he's a long-time American Hockey League referee. Just retired about 2 weekends ago.
Jeez. Well,
They used to call him Timbit in the minor leagues because Dunkin' Donuts or Tim Hortons.
yeah.
So you had big Coho, and then you had Timbit, which was kind of funny. And he didn't find it so funny, but it was that
Well,
was the era.
there's a certain, yeah, like you say, there's a certain level of respect you have to build. But these days, Dave, and we're going to get to the chat, obviously, you all have 1,000 questions. Trizak wants to know about goalie interference. Harry, we're going to keep that for later because goalie interference, I'm not even sure Dave, who's a master of the rules.
I'll come back for 3 hours on that one.
Right? Exactly. I mean, well, hey, you know what, Dave, let's just get into it. The verbiage in the rules is so vague that it comes down to a lot of decision making from referees, right? I mean, to me, that's what the crux of the issue is.
It comes down to a lot of decision making by the referees, but ultimately the final call is made by Toronto in the Situation Room,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a finite number of guys in there. So you don't have 36 referees. Well, you do have 36 referees with different interpretations, but ultimately the final call is made by a group of about 5 guys in Toronto, and they're pretty consistent. And if you were to read the rule and actually, do a deep dive into it and watch examples, and by the way, NHL.com
Mm-hmm.
has a video rule book, and it has a 10-minute video on goalie interference. It'll clear up a ton of questions. But I'm going to be honest, I see so many of them, and I called so many of them, that if you showed me 20 right now, just 20 random goalie interference calls,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to brag, but I'd probably get 18 of them right.
Oh, really?
Knowing what the call is going to be. Yes, because I know how it's interpreted, and I know what the dynamics are and what the parameters are, what they look for. And it's pretty darn consistent. I know people, especially in Montreal with Gallagher and all the time, he gets goals allowed. And by the way, I love Brendan Gallagher. I mean, I would take him on my team.
Yeah.
Super respectful guy on the ice. I had a lot of time for Brendan Gallagher. But people always say he gets his goals disallowed, and Matthews and Ovechkin never get their goals disallowed. He scores his goals from on top of the crease.
Oh, yeah.
That's his office. When you score your goals from there's going to be more goals disallowed. You're in a high traffic area. Ovechkin scores them 25 feet out. So there's a big difference in how the goals are scored.
It's funny because when you look at Brendan Gallagher, he actually, he creates more penalties for the opposing team than he takes. So, and this idea that the refs hate him, but there has been situations where he has mentioned that some referees specifically told him, "Hey, Gally, why don't you shut up?" Not verbatim. I know you guys don't ever cheer for a particular team or root, but there must be some players who, you're human. Impressions happen. Eventually, you start to kind of get a read on someone. So there must be some bias there, right? Because that's just human nature. You see Gallagher starting to yap, and you know that he was making the trouble. So how do you counter that bias, which is just a normal human reaction?
There's guys that get under your skin, and you have to know that going in there, that they're just the kind of guy that's going to get. Some guys aren't going to like it. I mean, as much as I wanted, the players to like me, that wasn't my job. My job, description was to apply the rules, and if they don't like it, it's too bad. But you like having a good rapport with the players, and a lot of times you can clear the air. I mean, I've had players go nuts, and I've teed them up unsportsmanlike, in 10 or whatever, and then beginning of next period, I'll search the player out. I'll skate around. I'll go, "Hey, man, are we good?" Because honestly, I'm good. Yeah, you stepped over the line. I did what I had to do, but I've forgotten about it. How about you? And it'll take them by surprise sometimes, and they'll be like, "Yeah, I'm good." And then it kind of makes them feel, "Oh, good, he's not out to get me." You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, before we get into the rules, and I have a lot of questions I want to ask you. You had your son was the linesman at the game today, so he got injured
Yeah.
in the same game. It wasn't, I think, where Jake Evans actually got injured. But anyways, it was the Florida Panthers game. What's it like seeing your son out there? Okay, and I have a question for you because I think it's insulting the coach's review or I guess it's not coaches, it's automatically triggered, but for offside. I think linesmen in general do a great job. So I want to know what's it like watching your son out there, and secondary, what's your opinion on going back and reviewing offsides? Because honestly, I feel like it's one of the worst things we've ever implemented in hockey.
Well, watching my son, I mean, I'm so proud of him. He obviously doing a slightly different job than I did. I was a referee. He's working the lines. But he's 28 years old, and every time the puck crosses the line, I still hold my breath.
Yeah.
Like I'm watching the game. I just, you just don't want your kids to make mistakes. You just don't,
Right?
You don't want them to fail. So you're just cheering for them all the time, right? It's funny, when he got hurt, I was planning on watching the game. Here in the US, ESPN Plus carries all the games.
Yeah.
You can just go back and watch it on demand, basically. So I was out having dinner with my wife and daughter, and my phone blew up. I must have had 50 texts. How's Ryan? Is everything okay? And I'm like, I have no idea what happened to him. So what he did was he dislocated his kneecap, which sounds really bad, but that's probably the best thing that could have happened. He didn't tear any ACLs, MCLs, and he was back in about 30 days. So that was really good. As far as the offside, I love the concept of video review for offside because it was brought in. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Matt Duchene was
I remember
about 10
the
feet
play.
Offside.
17 feet offside. Yeah, absolutely. He was in Newfoundland, and the red line was somewhere between Renfrew and Arnprior. Yeah.
Exactly. And there was nothing we could do to make that call right. And so the premise of let's be able to rectify that. Let's bring something in to rectify it.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it's a slippery slope. You can't just say, well, we're only going to review it, I think, when it's a lot, but when it's close, we're not going to review it. It's all or nothing, right? Yeah. So now we're reviewing inches, and that isn't good. That's not what the rule was brought in to do. My suggestion, a fix I suggested was, why not put a line about 18 inches inside the blue line, like a thin line, and if the puck or the player who's offside hasn't reached that second line, there's no review.
So kind of like a grace area, a grace period, but on the ice. Yeah, okay. Oh.
Right. And then people say to me, well, you're still going to have the was he on that line, the inch or whatever? You will, but linesmen don't miss 18-inch offsides very often. So you're not going to have a lot of reviews. The ones that you have will still be an inch or a centimeter, but they're not going to be very many of them because the linesmen don't miss 18-inch offside calls.
Well, I've been watching hockey for the better part of 4 decades, and that shine miss was one of the few mistakes. I actually think linesmen do an incredible job considering how quick the game is. And even with the challenges, they're still right almost all the time. So I'm right there with you. The spirit of the game the spirit of the rule is kind of being abused a little bit here. And it's unfortunate because hockey is such a fast sport that it really is it's such a juxtaposition and momentum, right? It kind of kills every single game. Right. So if I had one rule to take out, it would be that one. Which rule would you change if you had a chance to? Right now, you're in charge. They say, go ahead, Dave, change one rule. What would it be?
I would like to see. Well, there's two. I would like to see. We have a rule in the NHL rulebook, checking from behind, and it's only a major in game misconduct. There's no option for a minor penalty.
Okay.
So when somebody hits somebody from behind, and they don't project them into the boards, they don't charge them, they don't cross-check them or elbow them, but the guy's head snaps back, and you put the shoulder right into the small of his back. That's quasi-legal play, and everybody goes nuts.
Oh.
And if we had a 2-minute minor for that, the referee, I mean, if it's bad enough, a referee will call roughing or cross-check, but I think we would just clarify the rule book a bit if we had a 2-minute minor for checking from behind.
Yeah, absolutely. And you take a little bit of the judgment call out of the hands there. Yeah, because you know it's illegal play, but none of the rules actually cover
Right.
it.
And everybody in the stands has a kid who plays hockey,
Yeah.
and they see their kid get called for checking from behind, and they're wondering why we don't call it, because it's not really in our rule book that way.
Jeez. Well, you know,
And
it's funny because when we go into the rule book, I was just reading about high sticking the other day, and I think one of the things that we criticize referees a lot, but even us as media, I'm learning about rules every day, and the rules that I thought were applied,
yeah,
the verbiage is actually completely different. So I need to do a refresher once in a while. I love that idea. Now, before we get into the questions, I want people to know in the chat.
Mark, if
Yeah.
you just watch ESPN games, I'm there to explain the rules.
Oh,
That's all you need.
There you go. That makes sense. Well, hey, I rather complain blindly on Twitter with the echo chamber. But, you know, for example, I don't know if you remember at one point, it might have even been the game where your son was playing. But anyways, right off the face-off, Mike Matheson kind of swung at the puck, and there was a player on his knees, and it gashed him right in the face. I mean, he started leaking.
Yeah.
I right away said, hey, man, I understand why the opposing team's fans are upset. That was high sticking. I go read in the rules, and it wasn't, because he was actually making an effort at the puck, even though it was midair. And if he was the center, it would have been a penalty because he was on his knees, but it was the winger, so it wasn't. How do you memorize all this,
now,
Dave? How do you get all this lined up?
Well, so you got to remember, anytime you're making a normal shooting motion,
Yeah.
it's you're allowed to follow through, and that's in there because you don't want a player afraid to take a slap shot because he's got somebody coming to block the shot. That I might hit him with my follow through.
Mm-hmm.
That's on the player blocking the shot. So a normal follow through, whether it be a forehand or a backhand, and you cut the guy, is not a penalty.
But it was more of he was kind of trying to clear the puck more than anything. Is that considered a shot?
But
in
it was
your mind?
it was still a normal shooting motion.
Aha. Okay.
Normal shooting motion. And the other thing was, it needs to be above your normal height of the shoulder. So if there's a guy on his knees, and if it's not a normal shooting motion, for example, and you just go to swing at a puck, bat at a puck in the air, and you hit a guy in the face, but he's only 2 feet off the ice, you're probably not going to see that called either, because your stick wasn't high. You were playing for the puck. Now, any kind of wild swing, though, like let's say the puck's bouncing, you have one hand on your stick, and you make like a
Brashear
polo
or
type
a
shot.
McSorley there, yeah.
Well, no, but in an attempt to play the puck.
Okay, yeah.
And people go, an attempt to play the puck, and they go, well, he was shooting the puck. He was, but it wasn't a normal shooting motion.
Which is included in the rules. They do
stick.
mention the yeah. Okay.
Yes.
See, that was humbling for me because I got a ton of traction on saying it should have been a penalty. Then when I went and I looked up the rules and I said the referees actually got that square on, dead on. That, when I clarified that part, it got 2 retweets. When I complained about the referees, I got about 600 retweets. So it just goes to show the...
And that's all I do on Twitter is speak
I noticed.
rules. So you imagine how much negativity I get.
Well, is there a review? Because I know, okay, for example, and it's not that I hold a grudge or anything, but in Game 4 of the 2006 Eastern Conference quarterfinals on August 9th, 2006, they missed a clear penalty on Saku Koivu. It was actually Justin Williams. Hit him in the eye. Okay, I know you guys you hate it when you miss that, and I'm sure it weighs heavily. Is there a review process afterwards when stuff like that happens?
Are you talking about as far as to assess a penalty, or just in the big picture?
In the big picture, like let's say, for example, I see in the NBA oftentimes they have their own Twitter account where they explain it. They say, hey, we got this wrong. We reviewed it. This is how we're going to go forward. Is there anything like that in place for NHL referees? Maybe at the end of the year, a review or anything like that?
Well, let me get this off my chest, because it's probably the thing I tweet about the most.
Yeah.
Everybody who says the referees call whatever they want and they're not accountable. We wish they were more accountable.
Yeah, and I've said that. Yeah.
Trot them out, make them have a press conference. Well, the thing people don't understand is trotting referees out to make a press conference. When you trot a Montreal player out who maybe didn't have a great game, you've still got friendly media. They're not there to try and, they're not there to just get the guy. No one's mad at the player. If you trotted a referee out, people would be mad at the referee. He's got nobody really. There's no prior rapport. You're not in his dressing room every day talking to him. He doesn't know the reporters. That's a recipe for disaster. But as far as being accountable, every game that's played. So in Toronto, in a situation room, there is somebody assigned to every single game. If there's 10 games going on at once, there's 10 guys in Toronto watching that game with about 4 screens each. And they're called loggers. They log every single call that's made and every single call, in their opinion, that's missed.
Oh.
And those comments get forwarded to the referee. So when he gets back to his hotel room after the game or the next morning, he can open up his laptop, go onto the game, and he's watching the game. He can read the comments down the side about, look at this call, look at this call. This one was a good call. This one wasn't. So that's self-evaluation. Secondly, there is supervisors that are ex-officials who travel around the league. And I would say probably every official has a supervisor at his game, 40 to 50% of his games, and there's an immediate debrief after the game. If you didn't do your job that night, you're going to hear about it in the dressing room immediately after the game.
Okay.
Then there's a mid-season rating, which they don't actually give you a number, but it's a mid-season letter. It's a performance review. And they talk about your judgment, your positioning, your skating, your demeanor, your rapport with the players, your rules knowledge. And then ultimately, your ultimate job review is April 15th.
Yeah.
There's 36 referees. Only 20 get playoffs.
Well, that's how the public judges it, right? Is how the NHL or how they're feeling about the referees is who gets into the playoffs. Yeah.
Right. And they're saying, well, referees should be fined when they make a mistake. Well, you don't fine players when they make a mistake. You fine players when they do a deliberate action, like swing their stick or do something. When a player coughs up the puck in the slot or the goalie fans on a shot, you don't fine him. It's an honest mistake.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about monetary guys that don't get playoffs. A guy that works the finals can make an equivalent to about 25% of his base salary going all the way to the finals. So there's a huge financial incentive to working playoffs. And if you don't have a good season, your body of work doesn't allow you to get into playoffs. Now there's certain cases, there's guys that are rookies and stuff. They probably had a great season. They might not get playoffs just because of numbers. But I mean, you don't get playoffs, it costs you money. And to get into the playoffs, it's your body of work for those 82 games. Once you get into the playoffs, if you're Wes McCauley, you've worked the last 8 finals, let's say, for example.
Jeez.
You don't rest on your laurels in 82 games. You're now being judged in that 7-game, however many games you work in that first round. If you get outworked in that round, if you make a glaring mistake, if you're not calling the standard, you're not going to the next round. It doesn't matter how good your season was, and doesn't matter how many finals you did in the previous years. You're judged. It's just like teams.
Yeah.
Teams will win the cup and get eliminated in the first round of the playoffs the next year. Same with the referees.
Well, I never heard anyone suggest the fines. That's ridiculous, right off the bat. I mean, there's no other job in the world where you make a slight mistake and you're fine. But I do love hearing that there is some accountability in the sense, but for public nowadays, we feel like we have to have a little bit of control of everything. So I feel like that's something.
Shows like Survivor and Big Brother. Everybody thinks they have the housewives of whatever.
Yeah.
They think they have the right to know what's going on. We want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
You're going to tell us.
I think it's more of we don't. It's a consistency thing, right? I think if we comes down to it, if someone's going to come, I think from in-game rules are applied pretty evenly. How do you somehow make it more consistent? Because I know the NHL has crews that kind of rotate to make it so that there's no bias or nothing unfair, but that also comes with automatic inconsistency, doesn't it, Dave? How do you kind of make it so that you can rotate crews and keep it somewhat consistent?
So I went to 32 NHL training camps during my career, and then now working for ESPN, I was fortunate enough to be allowed to attend this most recent NHL training camp, and I was there just for 2 days while they discussed rules, and Gary Bettman was there. Yeah. And his message to the referees was, you guys know what the standard is. Stephen Walkham has prepared you. We've shown video ad nauseum all day. This is a penalty. This is a penalty. These are good hits. These ones aren't. You guys know what the standard is. We pay you well. You know what the standard is. If it's a penalty, call the penalty and we'll support you. That's Mr. Bettman saying that.
Okay.
If it's a penalty, call the penalty and we'll support you. So the guys know what the standard is. It really shouldn't matter who you're working with, what the team is, what the score is. That's in a perfect world. Now, obviously, I know calls get missed. Marginal calls get made. But in a perfect world, these guys know what the standard is. And it's no longer about consistency, because you can go out and be consistently bad
Hey, I made a whole career on it, Dave. Like,
No, but you can go out and call nothing. You can call no penalties.
But you're affecting the game when you call no penalties, right? I mean, that's.
But you're consistent, right? You're not calling anything. So consistency, that word's kind of gotten thrown out.
Yeah.
And what guys say now, what they preach at training camp is be true to the standard.
Okay.
You know what the standard is. If it meets the standard, call the penalty regardless of the time or score of the game. If it doesn't meet the standard, then don't call it. And that's how they try to maintain consistency. Until somebody's done the job, though, and the beat of the game and the sight lines you have to fight for on every play, because it's constantly moving, and what looks like a penalty here might not look like a penalty there.
It's easy to criticize.
It's a lot easier said than it is to actually be performed.
And I mean, I know just based on how many times off the live play I complain about something and then say, whoops, I saw another angle and now I understand why they applied it correctly. But hey, that's why fans are it's short for fanatics. And we're actually here with ESPN rules specialist and former NHL referee Dave Jackson, Montreal native, Pointe Claire native. Also, I mean, we're speaking a little bit of French before, but Dave, did you speak French to some of your... Oh, I actually have a question for you, and we're going to get to some of the chats. Do you remember your first game?
Ben oui.
So it was the New Jersey Devils versus the Quebec Nordique, right?
Colisée de Québec. Yep.
Do you remember who... No, that was my question.
Guy Lafleur.
Yeah.
Guy Lafleur was on the starting lineup.
Wow.
And there he was in all his glory, no helmet on.
And two fights right off the bat. I think, what was it? Owen Nolan got into it with a couple guys. But, hey, I always wondered.
All I remember is Guy Lafleur.
Yeah, you don't remember? Well, yeah, he scored the lone goal. I have a question for you. Yeah. Why don't linesmen get paid more than referees? They're the ones jumping in there. They're the ones, they're catching haymakers left and right. Why don't linesmen? Because my high school...
I'll give you a short answer.
Yeah.
I'll give you a short answer. When was the last time you saw a linesman's name in the headline of a sports column? That's
fair. That is absolutely fair. Yeah. Okay. No, it's just growing up, my high school sweetheart, her uncle, and you worked with him, is Wayne Bonney, right? He was a linesman, and he always told me those refs, they should give us half their salary, but no, he was joking. But so you still know Wayne Bonney, eh?
Wayne is a great guy. Yeah, I believe he's in Arizona now.
Yeah,
just golfing every day and enjoying life. But Wayne was a tremendous line. Montreal, from Ottawa, but spent most of his life in Montreal.
Yeah, he had family in Ottawa. Yeah, but he also, I think he was one of the only linesmen ever do 2 games in one day. He actually did a double header in the 90s. So, but okay, so get into
the New York area.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Before we get to the chat, how do you become a referee or linesman? It's the same process as your son, Ryan, took, right? So how do you actually get involved in this? Because you know what? They're always looking for referees. They're always looking for linesmen. So what's the process?
Well, there was only one path when I was starting. I mean, I started as a kid, wanted to be a player, and I played. I played hockey, but back in the day, you're talking in the 70s and early 80s, even when you played elite hockey, you were only on the ice 4 days a week, not 7 days a week like you are now.
Yeah.
So I refereed on those days off. And, when I never got drafted playing hockey, it wasn't good enough. I stayed refereeing. I was in college. I was going to John Abbott. And I just kept moving up the ranks until someone from the NHL saw me and brought me in. And I spent parts of 7 years in the minor leagues, IHL, American League.
I saw that almost a full decade before you got your call up. That's
don't forget, it was one referee back then. It wasn't 2. So you were in charge of the game by yourself. They couldn't put you with a veteran and bring you in. And so nowadays you still have that traditional path, but you also have the path my son took. Is they have a combine in Buffalo every year. The NHL officiating does, and they encourage ex-players. Guys that never made the NHL, whether they're junior, Division I college, maybe they played a bit in Europe, or they might have played American Hockey League, but they realize I'm not going any higher. And while I'm still young enough, let's see if I can referee. So they go to the combine, about 100 of them or so, and they play mini tournaments of hockey. And when you're not playing, you take turns refereeing. And then off ice, they put you through physical tests. They tell you what refereeing's all about. They show the same videos that the regular officials get at training camp. And at the end of the 4-day camp, they've sort of identified guys that have potential,
Okay.
and they place them in certain leagues. So Ryan got placed in the American Hockey League last year. He wasn't on contract. He was just working for the American League and did about 80 games in the American Hockey League. And I guess he obviously impressed them enough that this year they signed him to a minor league contract. So,
Geez, okay, so that's
yeah,
the NHL Exposure Combine is what they call it, right? Because it used to
exactly.
not. I don't
That's
think it
what
even
is.
had a name back in the day. Okay, we have
Well, it's relatively new. It's only been around about 10 years, I think.
Okay, yeah, because I remember looking into it back in the day when I was talking to Wayne Bonney, and he was just saying you got to know people more or less, and then you kind of have to be a good skater. And then he looked at my legs. He's like, "You're too short." So, okay, I have a question here from James, and this is actually a really good one. Nowadays, we heard at the beginning there, the sports betting's everywhere. It's one of the few things that sponsors hockey, and it's on every broadcast. Does that put more pressure, you think, on referees to do to get it right 100% of the time? Because now it's more than just rabid fans. You have money from people involved in here. You have sports betting agencies. You have Vegas involved. So does that change anything?
No, not one thing. Because contrary to what a lot of fans think, I lived and breathed and died with every call I made on the ice my entire career, as did everybody I worked with. The attention to detail and the focus and the willingness to get every call exactly right was all consuming. So adding betting to that doesn't change anything. I'm already at 100%. Now my average is probably about 50, but I was shooting for 100%, and that's what every guy out there on the ice does. Betting doesn't change that one bit. No. They want to get the call right.
Okay. Who was, and you can name one for the Canadiens and one in the NHL, but who was the most fun guy to deal with when you were active?
Oh, I wish you would have asked me that this afternoon. I would have compiled a list.
Because I know some guys were fun with, like Marc Bergevin was great with refs. There were others that maybe guys like Chris Nyland were a little more difficult to work with in Montreal. Who was the first guy when you think of like just a guy that made you crack up?
Chris. Chris is a good guy.
Yeah.
Really intense. I mean, Chris Chelios, I've gotten to know pretty well. We work at ESPN together. Chris would get really wound up, and he'd come over and he'd start yelling at you, and I'd just say, "Hey, stop swearing at me." He'd be like, "Oh, I'm sorry. and then he would just stop. He was such a professional, such a great player. I got to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Most players in the NHL are great guys.
Really.
Even when you have shouting matches, you'll be dropping, expletives every now and then. Funny story. I remember during the lockout, I taught high school back in 2004, 2005. And I would routinely talk hockey with teachers that weren't necessarily huge hockey fans. And when we went back to work the following year, they became fans of Canadiens games when I was refereeing.
Okay.
And I saw the guy the next day. He wasn't a huge hockey fan, but he goes, "I saw you last night, and it must have been a boring game because you were yawning in the third period." And I said, I can't imagine ever yawning during a hockey game. And he goes, "No, there was a player over. He was yelling at you and everything, and you put your hand in your mouth and you were yawning." I said, "No, I wasn't yawning. I just didn't want anyone to read my lips."
You were swearing in both languages, weren't you?
Well, I never really swore a lot.
No?
Because I felt that didn't give me a leg to stand on if I had to give them an unsportsmanlike.
Okay.
But I was telling him what I thought of what he was accusing me of. So yeah, let's just leave it at that.
What was I'm sure, going back to guys like Chris Nyland, I mean, you've dealt with some heavyweights in and around the NHL, especially in that era. Your first game, there was 2 fights. You were around in the Probert area, the Stu, anyways, there was a lot of really tough guys. Who was the scariest guy on the ice for you guys that before the game, you kind of looked at your linesman and you said, "Godspeed," like, watch this guy?
Well, fighters never scared me.
Okay.
I would say, geez, I'm glad I'm not another fighter because that guy would scare me.
Yeah.
But most fighters were truly guys with massive hearts and just great guys. They'd come over and talk to you. And you can ask Wayne Bonney this. I mean, most fighters, there's a code. And when they're beating a guy, when the fight's over, they break up pretty easily. The scariest fights are when you get 2 guys that aren't fighters. And
that have no idea how to fight. Yeah.
They're not fighting for sport or for, protect their jobs. They're fighting out of sheer terror and fear.
Yeah.
And they could do anything. They don't stop when you ask them. They just keep throwing punches. Not necessarily cleanest of fights. So those are the guys you got to look out for. But no, there's nobody. I mean, the respect level, even though fans might think it's bad, or players, sometimes they'll just, what they had to say is over the line. I never felt threatened physically by anyone on the ice. There's just too much respect out there. Even though they sometimes are yelling at the referee, there's still a ton of respect. A lot of times you'll see guys, you won't see them, but on a commercial stoppage, they'll come over to you afterwards and say, "Hey, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said what I did, and I overstepped the boundaries." And yeah, the players are good guys.
There is funny because the one of the nicest guys in the Montreal Canadiens is a rookie known as Arbor Jack guy who would probably be able to toss a minivan across the street, and he's just such a gentle giant. So that's my experience as well. I know he's tough. Oh God, he is tough. But you know what? And we'll have to move on quickly, but I don't want him to have to prove his worth anymore. I think, and I'm not trying to compare him to Jean Béliveau, but I'm hoping it kind of falls into a thing where first year you have to prove yourself, and then from there you hopefully don't have to fight every single game, because as a rookie, 10 fights in a year is a lot to do, especially these days. You don't hear that at all.
Do you remember when Ray Bourque came in the league?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've watched video of Ray Bourque fighting on a regular basis. He had to fight everybody.
Yeah, just to prove, and that was a year one thing,
Ray
right?
Bourque,
yeah,
one of the greatest defensemen in the history of the game.
Yeah,
and he had to fight, 2-3 times a week.
And then for the rest of his career, you just don't
never
touch
had
Ray.
To fight again.
Exactly, no. But no.
And Marc Messier was sort of the same way.
Yeah, and
Marc Messier is a superstar.
Yeah.
People just don't mess with Messier because, he's tough.
It's kind of when we saw, I don't know if you remember the final scene, Tampa Bay and Calgary, but when Iginla and Le Cavalier fought, we were saying geez, these are two big boys that don't have to fight, but know how to fight. And that was one of the best finals I've ever watched. Okay, we spoke about this before going on live, but let's go back to it. Do you remember when Ron MacLean, because Andrew's asking in the chat here, Ron MacLean mentioned at one point that referees from Montreal should not ref Habs games. However, he never mentioned you. He didn't specifically say it was French referees, but by not mentioning you, he essentially circled all the French referees from Quebec. Did you guys talk about that? What was your reaction to hearing that type of comment?
To be quite honest, at the time, there was no social media.
Okay.
And we didn't read the sports news. You don't watch that stuff because you really don't, because it's soul crushing. And I tell referees now, do yourselves a favor. They're not allowed to have Twitter, but don't even go on and read about your game last night, because if you do a good job, no one's going to say you did a good job. It's only the negativity, and it's just going to get in your head. So, I never really, someone told me about that years ago, and I was like, I didn't know whether to go, hey, how about me? You forgot me.
Right? You were the only one from Montreal, if I remember correctly at the time. Like the actually only ref that was from, the island proper.
Yeah, I think Marc Joannette.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he was from Verdun. Is from Verdun. But you know what? You can't win. You really can. I mentioned a really quick story.
Yeah.
I worked a game in Boston, Montreal-Boston, a week before the playoffs started, and it was predetermined already that Montreal was going to play Boston in
Montreal
the first
was
round.
8th, right? I remember they were in Boston.
I believe so.
First. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they went into Boston on a Thursday night, and the playoffs were starting on Tuesday, and Boston just gooned them. They just set the tone for the upcoming playoffs, and there must have been 7 or 8 fights that night. I worked with Paul Dvorsky, and we had our hands full. I mean, it was a tough hockey game. Mm-hmm. That meant nothing. Nothing. Didn't matter who won the game because the standings were set. And so because I was living in Montreal at the time, I drove, stayed overnight, drove home the next morning, and I put on Boston sports radio. And for 2.5 hours up through Vermont, I listened to them, the viewers, the callers, the hosts, just carving me. Dave Jackson from Montreal, loves the Montreal Canadiens, screwed the Bruins last night. He's a homer. He
hated Bobby Orr.
And right around Burlington, Vermont, the static came in. So I switched to the Montreal sports talk radio stations. And without missing a beat, Dave Jackson's from Montreal. He wants to prove he's not a homer. He screwed Montreal so bad last night. And they were all over me. I'm just going I can't win here, both teams think I'm a homer. One thinks I'm an anti-homer, and it's just
So that's when you know you're doing it right.
You just tune it all out. That's right. Make them all mad and tune it all out.
Absolutely. Well, hey, and it's funny because again, it's so many times I've caught myself saying, hey, once upon further review, I like the look of that. So referees nowadays don't have that option of the instant review, but in rugby, I don't know if you've noticed this, Dave, but what they do is when there's an issue and they're not quite certain, they actually go to a review booth, they announce it, and then the review booth has a mic themselves. So the conversation between the ref and the ref in the review booth is aired live. They come to a decision and then they make it. Would you like to see something like that implemented in hockey? It would kind of be more of an on-site Toronto type thing.
Yeah. You know what? I mean, in theory, it sounds great, but you spoke about it earlier. You hate the offside rule. It's a momentum killer.
Yep. It's
right?
That balance.
So what are we going to do? I mean, I think we have it pretty good now.
Yeah.
I look back to my career, the amount of high sticks I called that were actually follow-throughs, and I could have reviewed them now and taken the penalty away and got it right. Like, oh my God, like the sleepless nights I would have avoided if I'd have been able to do that. Guys call major penalties now. Like in the past, you would go, geez, I've got to be really sure to make sure that's a major penalty because it's real significant. 5-minute power play and the guy's out of the game.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to say you don't ever make anything up, ever. But if you're 90% sure, go with your gut. Call the major penalty and you get to review it. And if you look at the reviews that they give on the major penalty, I'd say about 90% of the majors they call are upheld.
Yeah.
So they were actually right with the original call. But you know what? Nobody complains about it afterwards because, hey, you made the right call. And then you can go on and you don't spend the rest of the game wondering, did I make the right call? You got it right.
It's and we have to also accept, and again, I know I always get yelled at by both sides, regardless of the game, because I call it how I see it. But if you make a mistake, that's the only time that you mention it. So like you say, it's one of those jobs where you have to get it right 100% of the time, which is very, very, very rough compared to all of us who, for example, I've made about 50 mistakes today. So, you got to start
the game 100% and get better.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I have a question for you for a guy like Nick Suzuki, who presents himself as he might as well be 95 years old out there. I don't think you've never reffed a game with Nick though, right? You were retired, I believe, before he came in the league, but you can see him out there. He's got that just the polite man, almost the Jean. Again, I don't want to compare him to Jean Béliveau, but acts like him as a captain. He never yells back. Yep. Does that build up a little bit more respect, a little more quickly with referees around the league?
People talk to me and they say, who are some of the guys you respected the most when you refereed? I look at a Joe Sakic.
Yep. Steve Yzerman.
Nick Lidstrom.
Yeah.
Like these guys they leave you alone. They come over and they saku koivu. They're not always in your face. They're not always trying to, back to like my thing about coaches, they're not trying to work you. There's a respect factor. And you can tell these guys sometimes, listen, I made a mistake. I'm not gonna make up for it because that would be 2 mistakes, but I'm gonna be better. And I'm sorry, and they'll accept that.
You just mentioned something right there that a lot of people accuse refs of is the makeup calls. So, it's almost too easy because there's so many calls in a game that inevitably, even if it is a legitimate penalty, you can say that's a makeup call. So is this theory of makeup calls legitimate? Is that something that you guys do? Because obviously it's something that referees are accused of quite often.
They've been accused of that since the dawn of the game, right?
Yeah.
All I will say about that is nobody likes making a bad call. If I make a bad call, then I'm going to tell myself that's the last bad call I'm going to make. I'm going to be perfect the rest of this way in. And all I can say to that is occasionally you're trying so hard to be perfect and not miss something else that you might overreact. But it's not done intentionally. You're not saying I'm going to call a cheap one to even things up, because going back to what I said about the loggers in Toronto, they look at it very analytically. They don't go, wow, that was okay because the other one was bad. No, they list each call and rate each call. So if I make a bad makeup call, that means I've got 2 calls wrong, not just one.
And that might cost you the first round.
Might cost me the playoffs. It could cost a guy $100,000 if he doesn't get playoffs.
Yeah.
And so nobody's out there going, I'm going to just find a penalty to make it up. But having said that, I'm not saying they're human nature. You want to make sure you don't miss one.
Yeah.
And overreaction happens.
Absolutely.
You overreact and you go, geez, like, I wish I would have taken a second. I can remember the biggest games I ever worked, like playoff games, if they were overtime games. I had to keep telling myself in my head, don't overreact. You've got more time than you think.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? You think if you put that arm up half a second late, everyone's going to go, oh, it was the crowd that called it. No, half a second is nothing. But give yourself that half a second. Really analyze it. Don't overreact. And that's where I think the mark of the greatest officials have that down pat. They never overreact.
Now, you just mentioned something that's interesting and relevant to Montreal, because I swear throughout the history, the Habs fans have called some penalties. I was in the crowd. I know it, Dave. I got that call made. So, okay, I know it does impact some players. They get more motivated, but how do you deal with 22,000 people, just absolutely eviscerating you in both languages? The tabarnaks are flying left and right. How do you deal with that in Montreal?
Yeah. Honestly, the crowd doesn't affect you one iota.
No.
Not one iota. It's a collective. The glass is so high, you never really hear individuals yelling at you.
Okay.
All you hear is the collective volume as it rises.
Yeah.
The external pressure you get comes from yourself, which I guess is internal pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And you're telling yourself, you know what, you got to be better, or you don't overreact. And the external pressure comes from the two guys behind the two benches, the coaches, and the 40 players on the ice that are working you constantly all night long. That's where the pressure comes from. I couldn't care less about the roar of the crowd.
Well, I always say I knew Montreal's crowd was back because I was working during the pandemic for the Canadiens, and I knew, they're back when they start booing every single time a Habs player falls, and they boo when there's not a tripping penalty. That's when like the Habs fans are in a healthy situation and they're back. What
you hate about that is it works the team up.
Does it?
The team
Right?
starts
It does,
believing. The team starts believing that
every single time a guy falls.
There's 20,000 referees in the crowd, and they all think that's a penalty.
Yeah.
So that builds a momentum bit. And the funny thing is, sometimes what I will admit that we do, if you've had a rough period,
mm-hmm.
whether you were right or wrong, but the crowd's really on you.
Yeah.
You make sure you don't come back. You don't come back on for the next period when there's no teams on the ice.
Oh, you don't do your
down. You time your arrival with the home team.
Is Montreal the only city that will absolutely boo the refs every single time they do their early lap? Does that happen in other cities?
No, it happened in all 32 cities.
That's when you're doing the job right, Dave. Okay. Yeah. I have a question here from a Dill Pickle, which is actually more of a technical question. Not a Dill Pickle. The person is called Dill Pickle. What's the difference between getting offsetting minors and having two minors that are concurrent at the same time? And that's actually I've never actually figured that out. So what's the difference there?
You're going to have to explain that question to me.
So offsetting. So for example, offsetting, two guys go off and it's 5-on-5, but sometimes two guys get a penalty on the same play and it's 4-on-4. So how do you, it has to happen in the same sequence, or?
So anytime you call 2 minutes on both teams,
mm-hmm.
as long as you're playing at full strength, it drops to 4-on-4.
Oh, really? Okay.
Once you're at 4-on-4,
mm-hmm.
then any coincidental penalties don't go on the clock. So, for example, you don't drop the 3-on-3.
Okay.
So that's basically it. And if you have multiple penalties, let's say you have a fight or a scrum, and you're calling 3 players on each team,
mm-hmm.
they offset completely. You stay 5-on-5. The only time 2 penalties, 1 on each team, drops is when you're already 5-on-5. You drop to 4-on-4.
Okay.
Now you could get the 3-on-3 if you're already at 4-on-4. And you call one team, so you drop the 4-on-3, and then during that 4-on-3, you call the other team again. It puts you 3-on-3. But that's the only time.
Okay. So, and how thick is that rule book again? It's about what, like 600 or 400 pages or something like that?
Well, you've got the rule book right here, which is, you've got a lot, and then you've got a case book that has about 1 million examples.
And you guys, do you guys ever get tests for this, or is there an entry test or what?
You know what? I didn't mention that earlier, but every week the officials get a rules test.
Every week?
It's every week. It's good fun. It's not like if they get them wrong, they're not going to get playoffs or whatever. But what it does is it forces guys to get into the rule book and look the rule up and answer it.
Yeah,
it's just a way of forcing them to. you only get in trouble if you don't answer your rule test. So they don't care so much about the results as they do the fact that you're actually making the effort to find out the answer. So that keeps the guys current. And plus, you know what? There's memos, there's rule memos and rule videos. Stephen Walkham sends out a email with a video. It's about a 5-minute video every week, and he calls it Calls of the Week.
Yeah.
And he picks the best calls that were made by guys, like whether they were gutsy calls, whether they were real close judgment, close offside, a good goal interference calls, and he sends those out. And it just builds pride. Guys go, oh wow, I made it this week. That was a great call. My boss is acknowledging it.
Yeah.
And it just builds. We're a team as well.
Yeah, well, that's the other side of it, is that people, again, I know nobody really would love the rest are not buying zebra shirts out there, but nobody wants to do a bad job, and there is a reason why, yeah, exactly, why you actually apply yourself. You know, you don't want to be in the paper the next day. Okay, 1,500 games, more than that. What was your best memory, Dave? Because, I mean, you did Sochi, you did, you even did the Memorial Cup, if I remember correctly. You had your 100th game in Montreal. It was Buffalo, I believe. So what was your best memory out of all that?
I'd say all those milestone games really were. You always remember your first game at Quebec City. First playoff game I ever worked was in Carolina when they were still in Greensboro before they moved to Raleigh.
Oh, really?
My first Game 7 I ever worked. I mean, a Game 7's a big deal because that means
everything's on the line.
Of all the guys that are still available to work in the playoffs, you've been chosen. You and your partner have been chosen to work at Game 7. You put a lot of pressure on yourself for Game 7. Only worked, 3 Game 7s my whole career, but still, those are things you remember. There's not a lot of Game 7s.
No,
I think in the history of NHL, there's been less than 200 Game 7s.
Yeah.
So that I had fortunate enough to do 2 All-Star games, and those are memorable not because of the hockey, but because you bring your family, and your family sacrifices
and
so much.
No one's booing you.
No one's booed. Well, I got booed in Tampa when I.
You got booed in an All-Star game?
Early in my career, I had a real issue with every time I did a game in Tampa.
Yeah.
This was back when they were just an expansion team, and you know how I won't even bring up names, but the Montreal fans, you ask them.
Oh, yeah.
Which referee they hit the most, and there's probably 1 or 2, right?
It's come up in the chat about 50 times already. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I could probably guess.
Oh, yeah, you would guess exactly who it is, but we're not going to go there today.
So I was that guy in Tampa.
Oh, okay.
And I was that guy in Tampa early on. They were talking 1991, 92, somewhere in there. And in 1999, I was selected to be the standby referee. So we only had 1 referee back then. That wasn't a 2-referee system.
Okay.
So they had a standby referee. So the standby referee would get dressed and do the skills competition.
Okay.
And they announced the referee for the skills competition, and I got booed. The backup referee for the skills competition got a standing ovation boo. Yeah. So, but when I talk about All-Star games, I worked in LA in 2002, and my final year I worked in Tampa, back in Tampa, and it was so memorable because my wife and kids had, the badge around their neck, full access. My kids got autographs, talked to the players, talked to people in the game. To see the smiles on their faces for all they sacrifice for when we're on the road 20 days a month, it was really satisfying. Then my final game, that was pretty emotional.
That was Phoenix and Los Angeles, right? I believe
Phoenix and Los Angeles. Both teams lined up to shake my hand. Both coaches waited on the bench, shake my hand after the game. And unlike my 1,000th game, my 1,500th game, I had a massive party afterwards. 100 people. This game, I had my family and about 4 close friends, and that was it. And it was obviously the guys I worked with. Marc from Verdun, Pierre Racicot from Verdun, and Lonnie Cameron from British Columbia. But it was just a very somber evening. It was bittersweet. You realized it's the end of the road.
Well, because you're losing. I mean, when players retire, they kind of lose that whole aspect of having that structure, that everyday thing, being part of a team, being part of a crew. I assume that's the exact same thing for referees, right?
Exact same thing. I don't miss the pressure and the stress. I miss pregame meals at lunchtime, hanging out with the guys you're working with, getting to the rink early, just getting undressed, putting your long johns on, and just drinking coffee and stretching, warming up, talking to the guys. I really miss that camaraderie, and I think that's what everybody who either a player, a referee, coach, that's what they miss when they leave the game.
Yeah, the chat's saying they've been really well behaved, and they have. Thank you. All of you have been great. Okay, I'm going to have to ask, what's with the guitars? I think it was Trizak that asks. He wants to know more about the guitars behind you. Are you a big guitar player?
I'm a big guitar collector.
A collector. Okay.
I play at guitar. I'm,
you know of music, yes.
I know of guitar. I can play 4 or 5 chords, and I can strum along, but you're not going to see me doing any open mics anytime soon.
You're not going to imitate Jimi Hendrix
I am not.
Any moment. Not. Yeah. Okay. I need to know, because you guys, well, actually, I think I saw a stat where I think soccer referees actually put in the most cardio, but you guys really aren't too far off. And I think maybe the linesmen, who does more skating, linesmen or referees? I assume linesmen, right?
No, the referees skate more, I think, because the linesmen primarily skate on stoppages.
Yeah.
I mean, they go blue line to blue line, but then they
stop
that
it.
icing.
Okay.
Yeah. Whereas when it was one referee, I remember doing a game in Maple Leaf Gardens, and this was early 90s, so I'm not even sure it was necessarily a heart rate monitor, but it was like a pedometer or something that measured distance. And I think I ended up skating about 9 miles.
9 miles. Jeez, that's more than I've exercised and I've done since the pandemic hit.
Well, yeah. But obviously now with the 2 referee system, you skate about half, maybe 2/3 of that. And most of it's backwards now. So you skate up. I shouldn't say most of it. Half of it's backwards, but your hard skating's done backwards because you followed a play. So back in the one referee day, you had to actually catch the play. You had to be at both nets when the puck was shot. Which
so the training must have been a lot more intense back then, right? Because you had to be one of the best athletes on the ice.
They still make sure that your cardio is right up there. I used to rue training camp. I spend my summer
you get beep tests or what is it?
Yes, you get beep tests. You got the Wingate test on the bike. You've got agility shuttle runs. You've got push-ups, crunches, planks, long jumps. The fat calipers, the checking how much body fat you got.
Oh God.
The greatest thing was the day after the fitness test, because
the donuts,
the bland chicken breast and the Miller Ultra were behind you for another 8 months. And
the chats keep asking about Kerry Fraser because they're saying he was hated by everyone. I don't think that was the case, honestly. I know, as someone that was watching it at the time, other than the Leafs complaint, first of all, the Leafs wouldn't have necessarily won the cup there because the Habs had a pretty darn good team, and also it wasn't Game 7. But what was it like working around Kerry Fraser? He must have been great. He was taking all the attention, wasn't he?
Well, for the first half of my career, it was one referee system. I'd only ever see Kerry at training camp.
Okay.
So we wouldn't work together. When we came in the 2 referee system, I'd been in the league at that point a number of years. I didn't work a lot of games with Kerry. He would work primarily with younger guys.
Okay.
But, one of the greatest referees ever.
I remember him being quite respected before that whole incident. He was the go-to guy all the time, the one that knew the rules the best. I know his image has changed since then, but
even the I believe you're talking about the Toronto LA incident.
Yeah. When he got Gilmore. Yeah.
It's a missed call. Those are kind of things that unfortunately probably define you because people still talk about it.
Yeah.
But it's one call of hundreds of thousands of calls he got right. And you look at all those guys, Kerry Fraser, Don Koharski, Bill McCreary, Dan Maruel. I mean, those guys were Terry Gregson. They were guys that for a long time were the faces of the league and worked the finals and represented us very well. I mean, legends.
Back then, and again, I know I'm going to, sound old when I say this, but without the echo chamber of social media, I think there was actually more of a level of appreciation for, because you weren't necessarily seeing mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake. You were watching one guy make a mistake every once in a while, as opposed to having it, lined up, so you didn't really obsess about that Bill Buckner-esque type mistake, and you didn't define him there.
Well, that's just, and our standard changed so much too. After the lockout of 2005, our standard changed immensely. It used to be you could miss something unintentionally.
Mm-hmm.
And, Bob Cole or whatever would be going, well, it's just good judgment there. He's letting him play. When in reality, you missed it. You just didn't see it. And now that's not accepted. Now they expect you to call, which I think is good for the game.
Yeah.
Can you imagine Mario Lemieux, what he fought through? Wayne Gretzky?
I go back to those clips,
two of the greatest players.
There were so many guys parasailing off Mario Lemieux. They were just literally just hanging off of him, getting dragged there. It was.
I think Gretzky and Lemieux would have 200 goals a season if they played under the rules we have today.
Easily.
They were just that good. They truly were.
I watched a clip recently because when I was younger, it was really fun watching when Jagr first joined the league, and him and Lemieux, they were spinning around the zone for about maybe 45 seconds. Dave, I will say there was about 12 slashes, 15 hooks, 13 cross checks. Darius Kasparaitis broke his stick 3 times. If that was what they're seeing today, people would be losing their minds. But I think we do have to admit, obviously, it got much better, and for the better of the game, let's be perfectly honest.
For the better of the game, and I'm going to date myself, but I was a huge Flintstones fan, the cartoon?
Yeah, but And
I remember Fred went back to Princeton and played football, and he'd get the football and he'd have 4 guys on his back, and he'd still,
drag him in.
He'd still run all the way down and score a touchdown. And I think that's Mario Lemieux.
Yeah.
He had guys hooking his arm. You have one hand on his stick. You'd have another guy pulling at him, slashing him, and he'd still score a goal.
Yeah,
He'd go through them all.
He was giving guys parasailing lessons while winning scoring records. And I'll say this, Dave, I actually think Mario Lemieux by far, and no disrespect to Wayne Gretzky, but Mario Lemieux was the most talented player to ever lace them up by far. And Wayne Gretzky, God, he had that offensive instinct, but watching Mario Lemieux in his prime was something else.
Mario was he was a specimen, right?
Yeah.
6'4", 200-some pounds, sheer, end-to-end, coast-to-coast, I'm going to score a goal. Whereas I think Wayne, I didn't referee Wayne early in his career.
No.
It was more later in his career. I never refereed him when he was in Edmonton winning all the cups. But I'll tell you something about Wayne Gretzky. He made every player on that ice around him a better player. He would just set people up. You go stand by the net. I don't care how many guys. Just go stand by the net. Put your stick down. I'll find you.
It was literally get your stick on the ice. And I think people do underestimate
he was a tremendous playmaker.
When they see the goalies from the 80s, they're like, anyone could score on that. No, I don't think they understand the gap in talent between Wayne Gretzky and everyone else. And it's still a gap that hasn't, there's a tighter gap now between Connor McDavid and the Stars. But the gap back then between Wayne Gretzky and, let's say, Doug Gilmour was just, it was a chasm. It was. And people say that about everything. You go back to baseball. Babe Ruth, he was overweight. It doesn't matter. He was a pitcher too. He was pitching.
Was better. And he was better, though, than any of his peers. So, I become close with Grant Fuhr. And Grant Fuhr's numbers, like save percentage or whatever, aren't what the guys today are.
Look at the 80s.
It doesn't matter. That era, look at that equipment, look at the training, look at the how they position themselves. He was just an athlete. He stopped pucks with his reaction. It wasn't positioning.
And his pads weighed about 100 pounds each once they got water in them between each period.
Grant Fuhr was better than anyone else of his era. He won all those Stanley Cups. He was a money goalie. If Grant Fuhr was parachuted into today's game with how they train in junior hockey,
the huge equipment,
nutrition, the equipment, he'd still be head and shoulders above everybody. It doesn't matter what area you played in. You're better than all your competition.
Yeah, and that's the exact same argument I make when people say, "Oh, Maurice Richard would be a fourth liner." I mean, you have to stop yourself real quick there and say, first of all, no, this is a guy who moved his moved someone literally like all their furniture and scored 9 goals in one night. We have to calm down, and the sticks were made out of a freshly chopped tree, that hadn't dried out. Yeah. So, okay, they have a question here. What Jeff Boivard is mentioning, was the Alain Côté goal good, Dave? Do you know what he's talking about when I say the Alain Côté?
I do. Kerry made the right call.
Yeah,
Kerry made the right call in an era where those calls were never made.
Yeah.
And Kerry made the right call, and I think Michel Bergeron, You lost it.
A little bit.
He was awfully upset, but I believe Kerry made the right call.
Is there ever a call that you look back at and you say, wow, I really missed that one? Because I know, Dave, I've spoken to you and Twitter a bunch of times, and I know you want to get these things right. So there must be something that kind of weighs on you. Did you have your Bill Buckner moment, your Kerry Fraser missing a high stick moment?
We don't have enough time on this podcast for that.
Yeah, you were telling me you got about 50% right. So,
No, you know what? I mean, there was a play in Toronto one night where defenseman for Washington, a Russian defenseman, came around behind the net. I believe Darcy Tucker,
of course,
started his own goal line and leapt through the air and I think knocked him unconscious. I think they stretchered him off the ice, and my partner and I both said it was a good hit. And I look back on that now and go, what was I thinking?
Was that the standard back then, or was that
no?
Okay,
no, that
so
was definitely a penalty.
Okay.
It was definitely a penalty, and you beat yourself up.
Yeah.
I've called. I had a call I made in the playoffs, Tampa, Washington, one night. The goaltender high stick somebody, and I felt it was careless. But I look back on it afterwards. Yeah. It was a follow through, but in my head, I wasn't thinking a goaltender making a normal shooting motion, and he cut the guy. I believe he cut Vinny Lecavalier, and Tampa scored on the power play, and they won that game and went on to win the series. And it's calls like that haunt you. And but I look back on that now, and with video replay, I could have reviewed that high stick and gotten rid of it. And
they're doing that now.
The next round.
They're doing that now. That's one thing.
They are, but
how does that get triggered? Like, how do they? Because I've seen sometimes they come together and they say, hey, by the way, I saw that, you missed this. They have their little huddle. That's, every fan loves it. Why doesn't that happen more often? What triggers that exactly?
Well, specifically for high sticks now, you're allowed to, if you call a 2-minute high stick, you live with it. If you call a 4-minute double minor high stick where a player is injured, and another misconception, it doesn't have to be blood.
Well, there's no blood in the rule book. There's no word blood in the rule book.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It says injury. So a guy's missing his teeth, or he has a massive abrasion down the side of his face. You can call that injury 4 minutes. And once you call 4 minutes, that triggers your ability to review that. Okay. And that's not a challenge. That's up to the referee's discretion. But if the team's losing their mind, they've seen the video, you might want to review it. Yeah. And you have three options. You can uphold the call, a double minor, or I should say you have two options. You can uphold the call, or you can get rid of it completely.
Okay, it can't go back to just a regular minor or anything, no? Okay.
Can't go back to a regular minor. The only reason you would get rid of it would be it was the puck that hit him, it was a follow-through, or it was his own teammate that hit him, and then you would just get rid of it.
So you refereed in the Forum, and for some of our younger fans here, I always try to explain how special it was. There was absolutely an aura in the Forum. I mean, at one point there was cigarette smoke down to the rafters, but you had the seats that were actually over you. They were popping in seats left and right. What was it like, refereeing? I don't know if you got many games there, because you started what?
Yeah, my first game there, I actually worked. It was a tour of the Canadian Olympic team. They played every Canadian NHL team. Okay. And I got assigned that game. And that might have been 1990, 1991. I know Eric Lindros was playing on the Olympic team at the time.
A Quebec favorite.
He'd been drafted, and he didn't want to play for Quebec. So he was on the Olympic team. So whatever year that was my first game in the Montreal Forum, which – you can say it's an exhibition game, but it was still a Montreal Canadiens playing, and it was a pretty big deal. And then I was fortunate enough, my first year full time, so I went. I'd done probably about 50 NHL games, up and down with the minors, and then I went full time NHL in 1993, and I got to do the home opener in the Forum, where they raised the banner, the Stanley Cup banner from winning. They won the cup in the spring of '93, so. Yeah. To be at center ice and watch that banner be raised, as a kid from Montreal, just living through all those Stanley Cups, it was a pretty emotional moment to just be on that ice and my family in the crowd, and it was pretty neat.
Yeah, and that was essentially the end of an era for the Montreal Canadiens. They kind of put the whole cap on it. And you had Jacques Demers as a coach. Listen, I dealt with him a decent amount in Montreal. My story was, when I was working with the Canadiens, he came up to me once. I was leaving the Bell Center, and he said, tell me about analytics. I don't understand them. I want you to teach me, because I want to get better. And as he's saying this, I'm staring at his Stanley Cup ring, just kind of forgetting like what's going on, So I thought that was just so impressive that a guy like Jacques Demers, that has, you know, all the pedigree in the world, wanted to improve himself. How was it to deal with Jacques Demers? Because he seemed like just a gentleman.
Oh, prince of a man. Yeah, just a tremendously classy individual.
Mm-hmm.
He's another guy who wouldn't hold a grudge. He might yell at you a little bit, and then, you know, you go over to him between periods and say, "Hey, listen, I know I probably got that call wrong." He'd go, "Hey, thanks for saying that, but you know, you're doing a good job. Move on." And yeah, a lot of time for Jacques Demers. Just class act.
That's the answer I get absolutely everywhere, Dave. Okay, we're gonna wrap up because I kept you way too long. We're over an hour. Jeez, I'm so sorry, Dave. I told you that 30 minutes. We're over an hour.
It's only 8:45 here in Denver, so it's still not past my bedtime.
Perfect.
Yet.
Well, I mean, I and the chat said it as well. We really appreciate you coming and explaining some of these things, because we understand you got to get it right, or else, you know, people will say you're bad at your job. So I think we got a little bit of a better appreciation for the game. So we do enjoy the fact that you said yes. And hey, very few of us have 18,000 people that boo when we make a mistake in accounting or anything like that. So, you know, it's a completely different job, and we do appreciate the work that's done. I think.
Well, the cool thing was my 1,000th game in Montreal. Mm-hmm. I actually got a standing ovation before the game started.
And then
when they announced it, so, well, you know,
and
they won
booed
the game eventually, but and then they booed. But
that's the Montreal
special.
Ovation. Yeah. That's when you know you're appreciated. They cheer you, and then the puck drops, and it's time to boo you. Well, listen, we really appreciate you, Dave, and everyone that was in the chat. Make sure to subscribe and like. I know I always forget to do that. We will be concluding in just one moment, but tomorrow we have another great guest. We have Owen Beck, Montreal Canadiens prospect, Port Hope native. So he's going to be on the show tomorrow after the Senators game. But thank you very much, Dave, for joining us. Honestly, we really appreciate it, and we'd love to have you back at some point.
Hey, we'll come back. We'll solve the goaltender interference problem.
You know, I'm about no. I think I got one right in the last 2 years, but that just goes to show, right? That one's a tough one.
Do yourself a favor. Go to NHL.com and go to Video Rulebook.
Okay.
Great video on it.
Well, yeah, but then I couldn't complain on the internet.
No.
Come on.
You can't have it both ways.
I absolutely can. All right. Thank you very much. That's Dave Jackson, former NHL referee. And right now you're doing, it's ESPN, right?
Correct.
Okay. And they can find you on Twitter. I forget what your Twitter is. I don't have it right here, but what's your...
It is ESPN NHL Ref.
All right. So follow them on Twitter and go on ESPN and get those rules explained. That way you don't seem like a dummy like me and complain and say, whoops, it was right this way. Thank you so much for joining us, Dave. On apprécie ça. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Anytime, Marc.
All right. So that is Dave Jackson. We're going to end it now. We're going to see you all tomorrow. Owen Beck after the Ottawa Senators game. Thank you to everyone in the chat. Love all of you. Much appreciated. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah!